Hi, I'm Jeff Braun.
Hi, I'm Ross Bentley, and this is
This is
No Dumb
No
Questions.
Dumb Questions.
Perfect. Nailed it.
Perfect. That was absolutely great.
Yeah,
Absolutely
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Well, another episode with lots of good questions here,
Do
and none of them are dumb.
do you know of any questions? Do you have any questions? Have you seen any questions come in?
I have
And
lots of.
we've gotten some really great questions, but we could use a few more. So if you're listening,
Yeah,
you got a question.
More is better.
Yep.
More is better. We did. I have to say, it was really cool lately. I've got some at the racetrack, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, we have a growing list that we try to chop down each week. So, should we chop one right now?
Yep. Go for it. Yep.
Okay. Here's one from Michael, and he has a question for Ross on right foot braking. He said, "I'm mostly a sim racer and starting to transition more into real world racing. In the sim, I left foot brake, and most of the time, I'm trail braking all the way to the apex, using just barely any brake pressure by the time it's to the apex, and can quickly transition to rolling on the throttle. When I drive in the real world, I can't left foot brake because I need to brace myself against the dead pedal. I'm finding it really hard to find the balance mid corner off when to transition from braking to throttle when right foot braking, because I'm used to transitioning from the brake pretty much straight to the throttle when I left foot brake. Should I be braking with my brake release and let the car take a set earlier so I can allow my right foot time to transition back to the throttle? I feel like when I try that, I'm getting on the throttle a lot later than I should be, and it just feels slower."
Whew, that's a question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the good thing about it is he's thought about it too. So many drivers, they just drive and they don't really think about it, but he's actually got it figured out where he's too slow to get back to the throttle, and he's super on it.
Yeah, no, that's the great thing. I mean, he's aware of what he's doing that works, and maybe he feels it isn't working. And so there's a few things that kind of jumped out at me. The first thing is, he's talking about the transition from brake to throttle being having to be really quick. And you know, a long time ago, a long time ago, I wrote a book called Speed Secrets, and in there I said, don't ever coast. Basically, be on the brake or be on the throttle. And as I wrote those things, I always thought of them as they were guidelines, so they work most of the times, but not all the time. And I'm going to say that it our famous answer, it depends, right? It depends on the car. Right. Because some cars, you actually don't want to have that transition be too quickly, because as you come into the corner and you're releasing the brakes, and let's say you're trail braking, as he's talking about here, trail braking into the corner, trail braking, easing off the pedal, easing off the pedal, easing off the pedal, and then you come off the pedal and you immediately go to the throttle. If the car has not rotated enough, you're just causing yourself a problem. And by rotated, I mean, looking down on the car from above, it's kind of like, is it pointing in the right direction? Is it pointing, on the right direction past the apex, so that when you go to throttle, you can go to throttle in one motion, as in whoop to full throttle, maybe faster, maybe slower, but there isn't I'm on throttle. Oh, now I got to ease up. Now I got back on throttle. No, I'm going to ease up again. And if Michael finds himself in that position where, he immediately comes off the brakes and immediately goes to throttle, but he starts picking up the throttle, but he's picked up the throttle before the car is finished turning enough and pointing in the right direction, and then having to just delay a little fraction of a second before going to full throttle, he probably would have been better off having more of a gap between coming off the brakes, the end of braking, and beginning of throttle. And you could say, well, so you mean coasting? Well, yeah. Although I like to call it hesitating. having a bit of a gap in the transition there, because sometimes drivers are in such a hurry to get to throttle that they then, like I said, they get to throttle before the car has finished rotating and pointed in the right direction enough, and or they get to throttle so quickly that it causes the car to understeer, and then that actually delays when the driver gets to full throttle. So that's the first thing that, as I'm thinking about Michael's question, is it really necessary to be that instantaneous between off the brakes and on the throttle? And for sure, some cars it is, but in a lot of cars it isn't. So I guess that would be my first thing, is think about that in that, is it actually a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And again, for sure, the transition from off the brake and to throttle with left foot braking can be instantaneous. In fact, you can even have a little tiny bit of overlap there. Although that
right.
could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. And but some of the best drivers who are right foot brakers, that the amount of time, like I've seen, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, I mean, I'm sure you've looked at data this, but I think it's like 0.3 of a second, I think, is a good amount of time for a right foot braker to come off the brake pedal and start applying the throttle. I think that's pretty quick for a pro, really, really good driver, I think.
It makes sense.
So right now, count to a third of a second, count to 1/10 or 3/10 of a second. I mean, it is almost instantaneous. So, but I don't know. I'm sure you could figure it out way faster than I could, but let's say the corner's min speed is 50 miles an hour. How far have you traveled in 0.3 of a second? I don't know. We don't need to do the math here, but
a short amount of time. And I think you always talk, I do too, about the car transitioning. And sometimes it's not bad to have a little bit of time to let the car take the old take a set kind of thing. And so a right foot braker kind of is forced to give the car a time, rather than it's braking, all of a sudden, boom, it stabbed the throttle, and it makes the car transition a lot quicker and can actually affect the handling. So I could see where there could be some benefit to having that little bit of delay.
Yes. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here, is don't just automatically think that that's a bad thing. Something else that I, as I think about, and I'm looking at your question here as well, and kind of going, you most of the time I'm trail braking all the way to the apex, which I have to tell you that I don't know of that many corners where I would ever brake all the way to the apex, trail brake all the way. Like, that is a long ways into most corners. Now, so I guess my question is, and by the way, have I seen that? I've been working with a lot of sim racers, and I see a lot of sim racers do that, and a lot more so than in real world driving. So I don't know if it's a sim technique, but that just to me is like, wow, that's a long ways into the corner to be trail braking. And so you kind of go later on, and I think you start to answer your own questions, is, should I be backing up my brake release and let the car take a set earlier so I can allow my right foot time to transition back to the throttle? It may be that you may be quicker if you actually moved your whole brake zone back just a little bit. We're not talking 100 feet. We're talking maybe half a car length, maybe a car length, moving it back so that your end of braking point, the end of where your trail braking is a little earlier in the corner, which is then that there is that little transition time where the car finishes rotating, or either rotating more to kind of get pointed in the right direction, or taking a set. But then when you go to throttle, you're actually getting to throttle a little sooner. You might be improving your exit speed. So I'm thinking about that as I'm going through this. And Michael, this is a great question. We could, Jeff, we're okay. This is going to be a 3-hour episode. Okay.
3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got one for you too. So when you go to your next stop, but I got a question for that Michael brought up.
Okay. So, again, it depends. Are we talking about slower corners? Are we talking about mid-speed corners? Are we talking about high-speed corners? Now, if we're talking about high-speed corners, I can see where your braking might be carrying into the corner a little bit further, maybe, although I'm a big fan of getting it done a little earlier in fast corners to get back to throttle or at least maintenance to balance the car. But if you are braking all the way to the apex, I'm concerned, especially in a slow to maybe medium speed corner, I'm concerned that your exit speed is suffering. And if it's a corner that's less than 60 miles an hour min speed, that to me is a corner where you probably have to change direction quite a bit, probably at least 90 degrees and maybe more than 90 degrees, in which case I think exit speed's probably going to be more important. Obviously, it depends on how long the straightaway is afterwards. But, when I read this, I'm thinking you might be good, as you say, backing up your brake, not just the brake release, but the whole brake zone. Just shift it back, brake half a car length earlier, and finish or end your braking half a car length or a car length earlier. That allows you to get the car turned, rotated, pointed out of the corner, so you can actually start feeding back to throttle sooner. And which is kind of not a left foot, right foot braking thing. It's just
braking.
It's just braking, right? So whether you do that with your left foot or your right foot, I don't think that part of it matters. But I think thinking about it that way helps you realize, and I think just that realizing that having that instantaneous end of braking to immediate throttle isn't always necessary and or ideal. Sometimes just having that little fraction of time, as you say, just enough to let the car turn and rotate and get pointed right is a good thing.
Yep.
Your question.
26. Okay. 26.4 feet.
Yes. 26.4 feet.
That's how far you travel in a 60 mile an hour corner in 0.3 seconds.
So that's what's that?
Two car lengths?
2 to 3, maybe, depending on the car. If you're racing a mini, it's like 5. No,
it's 5.
Yeah. That's
the answer. So my question is, I think this was really interesting, and I've been doing this a long time, and I've worked on seats and all that kind of stuff. But Michael says, because I need to brace myself using the dead pedal. And I'm thinking about that. Most of the drivers I work with in prototypes, they all, for the most part, all left foot brake. And they also use the dead pedal. And I'm trying to think, okay, so how do they brace themselves in a high speed corner without using the dead pedal? Because I know they're braking. And we do a lot of fancy things with the seats, when you pour a molded seat in between their legs to help their knees from flopping around and stuff, but you still have your foot kind of hanging out there. How do they do that, Ross?
So it's why one of the first things that I do with every driver is, especially in that kind of a car, is we need a heel stop, a heel rest. And the heel rest, the heel is on that little,
half inch tab basically that sticks up.
Yeah. And so the driver's heel is up against that, and then they're pivoting their foot at the ankle, pivoting off of that rest. And that gives them the fine muscle control, because if you don't have that, you're really operating your whole, you're using your, like, the big muscles in your thigh to move the whole leg, and you just can't be as precise, sensitive with the pedals as you can if you're doing it with your ankle, pivoting down there. So I think that's part of it, but not everybody, as we know. I mean, I don't know what Michael drives, but for sure so first off, in a simulator, you may not feel those G loads. And so you can get away with that.
Right.
But, if you are driving a production-based car with even a good quality seat, a good racing seat that gives you some support, yeah, there are times where having that left foot over in the dead pedal can make a big, big difference. So I'm a big fan of that. If you're going to right foot brake, that left foot, so typically if you're going to right foot brake, it's because you need to use the clutch with your left foot. Whether it's an H pattern shift or whatever, right? You've got to use the clutch, in which case the instant that your foot is off the clutch, it should be braced over on that dead pedal. So,
yeah.
Good on you there, Michael, recognizing that. But this brings up the whole thing around the heel rest and the heel stop and that support. So,
yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, that's a good point. It's a little off topic here, which we're famous for, is the whole, the whole heel rest thing. I don't think people realize how important that is. I know it's weird. I know when Colin jumps in a car, if there's not a heel rest and it's not if it's too far back or too forward or whatever, that's something that he's really, really wants to fine tune, because it really affects his driving. And some people might not even have a heel rest. And, heck, you can go down to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy some angle aluminum and a few pop rivets or a couple small bolts and get yourself a heel rest.
Yeah. The number of times where I've been working with a driver and the team is like, they have, the driver's got overlap between the pedals, or they're riding a pedal or whatever, or, their braking's not very efficient or consistent, whatever. The very first thing I do is I peer down into the footwell and go, yeah, we need to work on the heel stop. And
yeah,
as I mean, sometimes it's like adjusted a millimeter or 1/16 of an inch. Like it's tiny, tiny little bits of, a tiny little adjustment and getting that foot at the right angle. And wow, big improvement in the way a driver performs, because they're more sensitive and the muscle control is more fine tuned. So big deal there, Michael. Yeah.
No, that's really good. I mean, it's okay. So now we can get on topic, but really into the big thing. Okay, what's better, right foot or left foot braking?
Well, my answer to that usually
depends.
Yeah. Well, my usual answer to that is, because a lot of times people have gone from right foot braking to left foot braking. So they're learning left foot braking. And I always say that a good right foot braker will always be better than a mediocre left foot braker. And, but, if a good, somebody who's good at left foot braking and good at right foot braking, most times the left foot is going to be quicker. But a lot of times drivers will switch from right foot to left foot. And because their right foot has been tuned from years of working a throttle and or brake and on the street and things like that, the right foot is super smooth and sensitive and, has the fine muscle control and all that. But their left foot has been used to stabbing at the clutch pedal. And as anybody that's ever left foot brake for the first time knows, it's hard on the nose, because the first time you go to brake with your left foot, your nose hits the windshield, because you just don't have that sensitivity, smoothness, and everything. So, it takes some time to develop that. If somebody is committed to being the very best driver they can possibly be, and they're driving cars that don't require the left foot to be used for the clutch, then yes, learn to left foot brake. But if you only have enough time to become mediocre at left foot braking, stick with your right foot, because you'll be better with that than you would be with being mediocre with your left foot. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so I got one for you then that goes on with this. Is, a lot of people, I've had drivers who are like, okay, we need to go testing. I'm trying to get used to left foot braking. I'm a right foot braker, but everybody says left foot braking's faster, so I got to get used to that. How good is a simulator for that? Because you can do millions of laps in the simulator. Can you kind of learn that technique in a simulator, or do you need the G forces to help you with that?
Massively helpful. Helpful to 10 times, right? 100 times, 1,000 times. So super, super helpful because it starts to build the programming. And, again, it depends on the quality of the brake, the brakes on your simulator. If your simulator's got a generally decent feel in the brake pedal, a lot of cheap simulator brake pedals, the pedals are position sensitive. They're basically what a rheostat, I guess, right? And there's kind of no feel to them. But as we know, in real cars, brake pedals are pressure sensitive, and the best simulator pedals, simulate or use some kind of way to be pressure sensitive. So if you're doing that, then you can start to get a good feel for that. What is maximum application pressure, and then feeling the release of that, so you can build all that in the simulator. Yes, if it lacks that little bit of G-force, then it's lacking that a little bit, but a simulator is a fantastic place to practice it, as is driving on the road. I've worked with drivers who I'll say, what do you drive on the road? And they go, well, a car with a manual transmission, so I have to right foot brake. I said, get rid of it. Go get a vehicle that's an automatic transmission. Practice left foot braking to the point where, every time you come up to a traffic light, you can't feel that last little bit where the car comes to a stop. The initial application is firm, but, it's not a smack the brake pedal, but it's firm, but smooth at the same time. So because braking on the street is actually harder to be smooth because the pedal isn't as firm. Usually the cars are flopping around and soft. It kind of shows up all the bad habits even more. So practice it on the road, practice it on a simulator, and then take some time on practice days, test days, and to work on it on the track as well. So.
Right. I've always told them, go run a go-kart and try to right foot brake in a go-kart. I mean, it's not very easy.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I'm gonna switch here and ask you a question. I think we beat that one up pretty good, but I'm sure Michael's going, but well, no. Let us know what your next question is, Michael. Hey, Kevin asked this question at the Indy track, and I'm gonna assume we're talking road course and not the oval.
I talked to him at the SRO race. He asked me this. Yep.
Okay, and actually, maybe it would be interesting to talk about both oval and road course. But what changes can an engineer make in the race to change the handling of the car? And I think the key there is in the race.
That's a really good question because everybody else. You and I have talked for a long time about it. Well, if it's understeering, we can change the springs and we can change the shock absorbers and we can change this and that. But 90% of that stuff you can't do in the race. You're not going to make a pit stop and change that kind of stuff. So really good question. My big answer is, boy, I wish there was more because I get stuck a lot of times. Drivers on the radio, well, it's understeering. It's terrible. I can't drive it. It's just terrible. And I'm like, okay. And then 5 laps later, it's like, well, it's really bad understeering. I'm like, yeah, but I can't do anything about it, Yeah, but it's really bad. I'm like, well, you can come in the pits and we can spend 20 minutes putting new springs in it if you think that'll help, but we're not going to win, So you always get kind of in a box. So to answer that question, let's take IMSA sports cars because that's what you and I are both doing right now. There's not a lot. I mean, those cars are really restricted, except for maybe the GTP cars, DPIs, and things like that. We don't even have adjustable anti-roll bars because it's not legal in FIA racing.
So, Jeff, can I stop you there for a minute? Because I was sitting there kind of going, I spent a lot of years driving cars with adjustable anti-roll bars. Why can't we do that anymore?
I don't know because the rules guys who make the rules in Europe are French. I don't know that's not a bad. I'm not saying bad things about French, but they have their way of making their rules in the ACO FIA, and they've just never allowed adjustable anti-roll bars. In IMSA, they changed it to allow the DPI cars, and I'm pretty sure the new GTP cars will be allowed adjustable anti-roll bars front and rear. But GTLM cars, GT3 cars, P2, P3, no anti-roll bar adjustments allowed. I mean, you basically have a brake bias knob, and that's about it in the cockpit.
Actually, so Jeff, actually, there is one more adjustable item in the cockpit.
Yeah.
It's the driver.
See, and there is probably, Kevin asked, what can you change to change the handling in the race? That's probably the number one best thing you have is, if it's understeering, oversteering, whatever it is, the driver can have way more influence on that than really anything the crew can do in the middle of a race. And that's what you'll see the really good drivers do. Pick your guy, whoever you want to, pick Scott Dixon is a good example. I mean, he adjusts, he adapts, and Scott Dixon's car doesn't handle perfect all the time. It handles badly just as much as anybody else's does, but he can adjust to it. And there's, 20, 30 other guys that can adapt to that, but it's that adapting that's really good, because really all I can do in a sports car, it's a tire pressure adjustment, and you're almost like, I don't know. I think most of the time that's more of a placebo than anything else. It's like, all right, I adjusted your front tires. This thing won't understeer anymore. You'll be great. And I'm like, this isn't going to help at all. But maybe it gives them some false hope that it might be better. It's very small help. A little bit of tire pressure here and there might have a little help. We can't. It used to be in sports cars, we could change wings, like the gurney, the wicker in the rear wing. You could slide that out and slide another one in. Not legal anymore. I'm not sure about the current Indy cars, but back when I was doing Indy cars, we could do that. We could change the gurney flap. It had a little door on it, and slide one out, slide another one in, and you could do that. I still see those guys at the back of the car. They can change the wing angle pretty quickly on IndyCar. You can change front wings. You see them do that. You even see the Formula One guys with their electric drills changing the front wing angle. So they can do those kind of things. In sports cars, we don't have any of that. So, it's a pretty long change. We've seen people at like Daytona, if you get into the race early and you got to live with something that is not the way you want it, and you got to live with it for 20 hours under a yellow, you could get in there and maybe take the shock cover off on the front and make a quick ride height change or a quick damper adjustment or something and put it back on and lose track position on that pit stop. But if you got 20 hours to make it up in balance, maybe it's a better, it's worth taking that track position hit. So, man, it's tough. I've thought about things like, okay, if the car is really nervous and really oversteering, well, maybe I just have the mechanics like kick a dive plane off the front of it, just break it off and try to balance it that way. But I mean, that's the kind of weird stuff we're trying to think of, because there's not much you can do.
And it's interesting.
That's the answer.
Yeah, I mean, and I've heard you do this better than a lot of engineers, is what you say to the driver, the communication to the driver. And like you said, it could be, hey, we're going to, adjust tire pressures at the next stop, and that'll help you. But, think about, trailing in more, or, get off the brakes earlier, or, change your line here or something like that. So, I mean, you're really good at that, at encouraging drivers to make a change, because, I think a lot of drivers get into that mode of, I got a problem and I'm just going to try to force it to do what I want it to do. And 9 times out of 10, that makes the problem worse. Right. And,
exactly.
Having somebody just say to you, hey, can you change your brake release? Does it respond to trail braking more or less? And by you asking that question, the driver starts trying that and goes, oh, I can actually fix some of this. But in the heat of the moment, for a lot of drivers, it's like, I can't think of what else I could do. But you just asking that question fixes it for the driver. The driver gives the driver something to work on. So, yeah.
And that's one of the things I think some of the good drivers, when they're testing or practicing, then we're trying to set the car up. It's not handling right or perfect, right? Because that's why we're there. We're working on this, trying to get it to handle better. And the good drivers will go, okay, I know what the car is doing. We'll keep using our example. It's understeering too much. Great. And then maybe they'll take a couple more corners on that lap when they're coming to the pits to get a change. And they'll try a few things driving style wise to see if they can make that less. Then they file that away in their brain. And if that crops up again, on Sunday, they've got a couple techniques that they've already pre-tried, rather than just, it's understeering, I'm going to get to the pits as fast as I can. No, you got 3 or 4 more corners on this lap. Let's try a few things. And then that toolbox of, like Kevin asked, what can you change in the race? Well, the driver has some of those things that he can change in the race.
Yeah. And you and I have worked together a few times where we've worked with a driver or drivers and deliberately made the car understeer or oversteer or whatever. We've done that many times, and had drivers go and figure out how to adapt to that. Maybe give them a few tips or cues or clues on that, but let them figure that out, and they just become way better drivers because of that. So
absolutely.
And that's maybe a little hint if you're listening to this, what you could do yourself. Yeah. Right.
And then the last thing was, the other encouragement is, I've been oftentimes it's a track condition that's changed.
Ooh,
I mean, especially in long races, like Sebring's a great example. Sebring in the afternoon, everybody's car is horrible. Everybody's screaming. And so I'll tell my driver, he'll be like, it's terrible. I'm like, yeah. And, we're listening on the scanner to all our competition, and they're screaming as louder than you. So you just do a better job than they are, and we'll be fine. And when the sun goes down, it'll be back to good again. So, understanding maybe why it's bad too, you can, as a driver or an engineer making in-race changes, you could dial yourself straight out of being good for the last 2 hours when you have to really be great.
Yeah. So, well, great stuff, Jeff. I was thinking, we usually kind of take on 2 questions, one driving, one engineering kind of focused here. But I was thinking, because somebody sent in just an interesting question, so I thought we should throw this in at the end here. And it's I don't know who Tacos and Turbos is, but they sent in a question a while ago, and it said, should you be able to swap tires under red flag conditions? No. Absolutely no. I think that is the dumbest thing in Formula One when they can do that.
What? I mean, it's supposed to be the pause button, right? It's like pause, everybody freezes, and then you go back racing again.
Yeah.
Who does that? Formula One, right, is the only guys. I mean, nobody else I know of.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, you got a problem, cause a red flag so you can come in and change the tires, put a new nose on the car. I mean, they do a lot of stuff to those cars under a red flag. And that's just, to me, that's just wrong. Yeah.
So Formula One has, we should not get started. But I mean, the whole, in my opinion, again, we're off on a tangent, quick one. When the yellow flag comes out, they should close the pits. I mean, like Formula One seems like they're the only guys that don't do that. Maybe there's somebody else, but I mean, close the pits. I mean, it gives the guys who happen to be at the pit entrance, and when the yellow flag comes out, an advantage, and the guys that already passed it a huge disadvantage. So, stop that and don't let them work on the cars at all during red flags. That's my opinion.
It's funny. I mean, Formula One's supposed to be the pinnacle of the sport and all this kind of stuff, and yet there's a couple of those rules that are just like, that's just wrong.
Wrong. wrong. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Cool.
but a fun question anyways. So
really good. Yeah.
As we said in the very beginning, if you've got some questions, send them to us. Email them to us. Stop us at the track if you see us at the track, and just say, "Hey, I have what I think is a dumb." I had somebody send one in the other day, and they said, "I think this is a dumb question," and it wasn't. But you can call it a dumb question. We're good with that. So,
right. Right. Remember, we don't do dumb questions. So if you think it's a dumb question, we're not going to answer that. It's not happening.
Yeah. So, hey, thanks for listening. And I guess until we get to the next episode, as usual, keep learning, having fun.
Yep. Have a lot of fun. And we'll talk to you soon.